Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today, and it is Monday, September 9th, 2013. A lot of strange stuff going on here. The breaking news. First of all, our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room answering the phones. And I'm going to take one story a little bit out of sequence because we have a lot to talk about this insane rush to war in Syria, and it just hit a major roadblock. Now, what happened, okay, is that over the weekend, Russia made a suggestion to Syria to turn control of their chemical weapons over to international monitors. Now, that made Russia look like they're still trying to find a peaceful resolution to this, and John Kerry did not want to have that happen. So in what even the New York Times is saying was an offhand remark, he said, yeah, if Syria surrenders the chemical weapons, you know, they can head off the invasion. He made it an either-or. Give us your weapons or we'll invade. And he walked into a huge bear trap, because as soon as he said that, Syria said, yeah, you can have our chemical weapons. It's not like we're actually using them. It's costing us money to store and guard. Yeah, come and take them. And now Kerry's got nowhere left to go. The last shred of legitimacy for an attack on Syria just went out the door. Because all of the other excuses and claims and counterclaims had already evaporated, and they were down to basically saying, well, we don't know who did the chemical attack, but the best way to deal with that is to go in and take the chemical weapons out. And now Syria is saying, here, come take them. Back the truck up. They're all yours. And it is a reminder that when you run a government as a bunch of poker players who are all into bluff and bluster, and you find yourself up against a chess master, you're going to lose. Russia and Syria played this beautifully. They just laid out that little display about, international controllers. Kerry just presumed Assad wasn't going to go for the deal, so he hopped on board to make it look like the U.S. is still looking for a peaceful resolution, and they slammed the trap shut on him, and now he's got nowhere left to go. Now, that doesn't mean the war is off, because what the United States war hawks are probably going to do with Syria is exactly the same thing they did with Iraq. Because just before that invasion in 2003, Iraq said, look, you can come and look for nuclear weapons anywhere you want, even in Saddam Hussein's bathroom, under his bed, whatever. And the U.S. response was, it's too little too late. You should have done this the first time we told you, and they launched the attack anyway, and I fully expect them to do that. But when they do, it will be seen as an unprovoked, unjustified aggression by the entire world, and certainly by the American people. But they have to get that war going, because if the war on Syria stalls, they're never going to get their war with Iran. It's not going to happen. The backlash against the very obvious, clumsy, blatant lies about Syria proves the American people are awake. And they're not going to buy any more stories about Iran's nuclear bombs and how terrible all those Iranian people are. Israel's been crying nuclear duck, saying that Iran is just weeks away from an atomic bomb. And they've been saying that since 1985. Iran is just weeks away from a bomb. They're a month away from a bomb. They're 3 months away from a bomb. They're going to have a bomb next Shrove Tuesday. And on and on and on and on and on, until the world is just sick and tired of Israel's up there saying, oh, they've got weapons of mass destruction. You should go kill them for us. Now, a very alarming story is coming out of Russia today, where their sources are claiming that some of these hired mercenaries inside Syria are getting ready to launch a chemical weapon attack on Israel from within Syria, specifically from within an area that Assad is supposed to be in control of, in order to provoke the war. Israel screams, oh, we're under chemical attack from Syria, please go forward, go forward. And we know Israel is doing these false flags to get this thing going. Because last Tuesday, remember, Israel fired a couple of missiles at Syria, claiming it was an unannounced test. Now, under international treaties, which Israel has signed, all missile tests are announced ahead of time to give civilian traffic in the area time to get clear. It's just common sense. That's how we knew that the Navy was conducting live fire exercises off the coast of Long Island when TWA 800 was shot down, because there is a paper trail, notices to airmen, notices to mariners. There's a whole process you have to go through when you say, we're getting ready to fire test missiles over occupied territory. And that appeared to have been an attempt to provoke Syria. Where the story we're getting out of Russia is that Israel launched the missiles from some of their submarines on the far side of the American fleet to make it look to Syria like the rockets were coming from the American ships to provoke a response, and thankfully Assad did not fall for that. So we know Israel lives by the false flag attack, USS Liberty, Lavon affair, USS Cole, 9/11, and now last Tuesday's attempt to spook Assad into an overt military action. So there's no question they will try it again. And now, of course, we're getting this report from Russia today saying that there will be a false flag chemical weapon attack into Israel so Israel can say Assad is attacking us. But again, common sense. Why would Assad attack Israel? What does it get for him? They've already made this deal to surrender their chemical weapons to international controls. They've pulled the rug out from under the war agenda. Assad is getting what he wants, which is to not have the U.S. come in and drop a couple of $100 million worth of cruise missiles all over his real estate. So why would Syria carry out a gas attack against Israel at this particular moment? And the answer is, of course he wouldn't. But Israel would carry out such a false flag attack. The hired mercenaries would carry out such a false flag attack because they are desperate to get this thing going. And desperate people take desperate chances. And I'm not the only person saying this. We've got all kinds of people like Ray McGovern. They're all over the net saying, yes, the next logical step for this war agenda is they're going to try a false flag attack somewhere, somehow. Something. We don't know, but we just know they're going to do something. Because these people have invested so much in this war to force the world back onto Bretton Woods. They're not going to let a little silly thing like the will of the people or the complete exposure that this is all based on lies get in their way. And we need to be ready for that. All right, going to grab a quick phone call here. Andy Steele in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, thank you for taking me on the show. I love your show, by the way, and your analysis, and I can't believe I haven't called in until today. I'm a volunteer with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's Richard Gage that started that
we
group.
know it well. We know it well. We link to them. I had the very great pleasure of meeting Richard Gage in New York on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we had him on our show not too long ago.
Oh, excellent. Well, I just wanted to get the word out, and I don't know how much you've talked about. You probably have. But just in case, I want to remind everyone that the Rethink 9/11 campaign is in full swing. We've got a big billboard out there in Times Square, and there's going to be a rally in Times Square at 5:20 p.m. on this year's September 11th anniversary. So I want to see anybody who can conceivably travel out there. I want to see you out there. I want to meet all of you. You'll be able to meet Richard Gage there and hear his talk in front of that. But even if you can't get out to New York, there's still other things you can do, okay? You can call your favorite media source, whatever it is. Obviously, if you're listening to Michael Rivero, it's going to be Michael's show. But maybe you're not so favorite media source like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Let them know that this rally is going on. Let them know that this Rethink 9/11 campaign is going on, and puts the onus on them to decide whether or not they're going to report it. Also, too, if you go to ae911truth.org, you're going to see there's an article written by myself up there about Alan Grayson's very interesting response to a 9/11 question that he got when he was a guest on Washington Journal. The phone numbers for Washington Journal are posted there. You can call in to Washington Journal on the morning of September 11th. Let them know what you think about the event that happened 12 years ago that we're still basing our domestic and foreign policies off of. The biggest way to
Andy, I'm sorry to cut in. We have to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up the phone. When I come back from this commercial break, I want you to pick up and continue from where you are now, okay? Andy, are you going to stick around?
Absolutely, sure.
All right, we'll be back in 3 minutes. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Andy Steele from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And Andy, you're telling us about this Rethink 9/11 campaign, which Richard and all of you volunteers have managed to get into like large number of cities. You're up on the sides of trains. There are posters all over the place. A lot of attention being brought to the 9/11 false flag attack with the anniversary this Wednesday. And what else did you want to share with us?
Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, we just get into the science. The organization doesn't get into blaming any party, but speaking personally as Andy Steele here, you were talking about false flag attacks, that the best way to prevent the next false flag attack is to talk about the earlier ones. And I kind of equate the 9/11 Truth movement as America's guilty conscience, okay? It's the heart beating underneath the floorboards that's driving the murderers insane. And, I heard a piece of World War II propaganda not too long ago, and it was used on the other side, but we're going to use it too. It's a line that says, it's a million trivial things done well every day that's going to win this war for us. Well, I apply that to us with 9/11 Truth, and the only way that you fail in 9/11 Truth is by not swinging, by not stepping up to the plate. So, rethink 9/11. It doesn't just end after 9/11, after the rally and everybody goes home. It continues on, and it continues on when you speak about it on your favorite, or maybe not so favorite, call-in show, or when you talk to your friends and have loud conversations on the subway about it. The more we talk about this, the more we are saving lives. So that's why people need to get this message out to as many people as possible and keep on bringing up Building 7 and the irrefutable scientific evidence that proves that that building was brought down in a controlled demolition that day.
Well, it's really important this anniversary for people to get out there, and especially to get out there to people who may not still be getting information from the Internet, those Luddites who are still out there bowing and scraping to that TV set in their living room, because what has happened here in America, because of this very heavy-handed and obviously bogus claim about Syria, it has awakened Americans. It broke through their denial. And everywhere I'm going and talking to people, they're angry. They understand. They accept. The U.S. government has been lying to them. They're furious at being made total fools of, not once, but over and over and over again. And now they're ready to look at other incidents in history where the government may have lied to them. And, of course, they're finding plenty of fodder. No torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, August 4th, 1964. No Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. There were weapons on the Lusitania that got us into World War I. It goes on, and people are ready to look at the evidence that 9/11 was a fraud, and it's certainly out there. We have the way the Secret Service Protective Detail let Bush simply sit in that school reading about pet goats, even though in theory they didn't know how many planes were up there crashing into buildings. Bush's presence in the school was in the media 3 days ahead of time, and there was an airport only 4 miles away. And yet from their actions, it is obvious the Secret Service Protective Detail knew that Bush was not a target on 9/11. The only way they could know that is they knew what the targets were ahead of time. We have photographs of very obvious demolition scars on the load-bearing members of the World Trade Towers. We have that incredible, bogus BBC report on the collapse of Building 7 26 minutes before it actually happened, that they cannot explain other than to say, oh, we threw away the raw footage so we really can't be sure, which is nonsense. Anybody who's worked in TV news understands that raw footage of history-making events is a valuable resource that gets licensed and made money on time and time again going into the years. And so it's really just that obvious. And today, the world is very different. Americans are ready to say, yeah, this government's been lying to us all along. You tell me the truth. And especially with the anniversary of 9/11 on Wednesday. Now is the time to get on out there and just say, hey, that government that lied to you about Syria's gas weapons and Saddam's nuclear weapons, well, guess what? They lied to you about 9/11 as well. And print out the information. We've got a whole bunch of links on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com this morning to just print it on out there and say, does this make any sense that BBC could know ahead of time, 26 minutes before it happened, that World Trade Center 7 was going to collapse? Does it make any sense that with an airport just 4 miles away from that school, that the Secret Service would just casually let the president sit there reading about pet goats until it was time for him to make his speech? And when you just put it right out there, people are saying, yeah, it really doesn't make any sense at all. As of the last poll I heard, 84% of Americans do not believe the government story on 9/11. Now is the time to push even harder. Andy, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. Please give Richard Gage my best and tell him, well done from me. And, yeah, we're going to be pushing on 9/11 today, tomorrow, and Wednesday as well. All
right. Thank you, Michael.
All right. You got it, Andy. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. The propagandists inside Washington, D.C. are waking up to a new reality. They have lost the trust of the American people. Not a little. It's been eroding slowly over time because of the independent media. But Obama and his claim that Assad used gas against women and children right in front of UN chemical weapons inspectors on the day they arrived defied belief. That was the death blow to the government's credibility. All the members of Congress are saying, well, the president has to maintain his credibility. The president's credibility is gone. Congress' credibility is gone. The credibility of the entire federal government is gone. And they did it to themselves. I know that we've got people like John Kerry out there saying, oh, it's that internet, it's the independent media, they're making it impossible to govern. No, you made it impossible to govern, because you cannot govern without the trust of the people. When you lie to the people over and over and over and over again, you destroy that trust, that faith, that credibility. And it doesn't come back quickly. It really doesn't. Now, in the category of, gee, I hate it when I'm always right, or I hate being right all the time, we're just getting a story in from Washington's blog. Remember what I said before when Kerry walked into this trap about Syria would surrender its chemical weapons to head off an attack, and I said the U.S. government is going to pull the same thing they did with Iraq. Oh, it's too little, too late. And we're already hearing that. AP is reporting that U.S. officials are saying they'll take a hard look at a proposal for Syria to surrender its chemical weapons. State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf said the U.S. is considering the proposal with serious skepticism because it appears to be a stalling tactic. In other words, they're still planning on carrying out the attack. Now, Obama today is starting his TV blitz. He's taping interviews with CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox, and PBS. They're being taped at the White House to be broadcast tomorrow in the run-up to his speech before Congress to say, yeah, let's invade Syria, let's invade Syria. And he's facing an uphill battle. The latest whip tally from Bloomberg is there are only 35 votes in the House in favor of war, 182 firm no's. Representative Riddell, Trey Riddell, from a Republican of Florida, is saying his office is receiving only 4 calls in favor of war with Syria for every 1,000 against. Now, over the weekend, we saw this whole story starting to crumble. It, originally began, Assad gassed his own people. That was the big lie. And now they're kind of pulling back from that. Congress members who saw that classified evidence and that DVD that the CIA put together are saying it doesn't prove anything. It's just well-presented assertions, well-presented claims, but they're not backed up by anything. So even the Congress members who saw that classified briefing, they're saying it doesn't actually make the case here. And here's where it gets really bizarre. Over the weekend, U.S. White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough admitted there is no evidence that Assad had anything to do with this gas attack, but they're not through trying. More when we come America, back. Welcome back to the show here. And before I take this phone call, the White House is literally, can't even talk this morning, relying on star power to sell its Syria agenda. They had Susan Rice up there on TV, the woman who lied to us about Benghazi, and now they've got Hillary Clinton up there pushing for, also lied about Benghazi. They don't actually have anybody inside the government that has a shred of credibility left with the American people. But they're going to put them up and say, see, this is Hillary, and this is Susan, and these are our big-name stars, which is why you should believe them. And, of course, Americans are saying it's the reason we should not believe them. If they're part of this administration, they are part of the problem. It's not just Obama. It is a systemic problem with the entire government. All right, back to the phones. John in Barbados, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'd like to make some observations before doing anything else. I'm looking at the situation. We have CIA proxies, the Al-Qaeda and various things destabilizing various nations. We have all this NSA spying on the whole planet. Then we have military and CIA drones bombing nations all over the place. Mm-hmm. We have military bases everywhere, spy planes, spy satellites. this U.S. administration, as far as I'm concerned, is waging a covert and overt war on the whole world, every nation. It's not just making war on Syria, but the whole planet.
Yes, they are.
It's crazy.
And that's why they're pushing forward with Syria. I mean, if the issue were just Syria, common sense politics would tell you, okay, you're in a bad position, you know, figure out some way to declare a moral victory and go home. But remember, Syria is the final stepping stone to that long-lusted-for war with Iran. And the agenda behind all of these wars is forcing the world back onto the petrodollar deal, where you can only buy natural resources by going through the dollar, so the U.S. gets a piece of the action, specifically Wall Street. They're trying to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, where the dollar remains the global trade and reserve currency, from which the Wall Street gets a piece of that action, because if you're trading in dollars around the globe, where do the dollars come from? They are borrowed at interest from a private central bank. What the Federal Reserve did to the American people, Bretton Woods did to the entire planet. And they don't want to give up all of that, you know, unearned wealth just pouring in and pouring in. And that's the agenda behind these wars, forcing the world back onto Bretton Woods.
Yeah, Michael, but what I'm thinking is, I mean, the resistance shown from the citizens around the world, this could reflect really badly on the American people and Americans when they're traveling around the place.
I disagree. I disagree. What I'm hearing from people overseas is they recognize that we, the American people, are not supporting this. We're not behind it. We're out there at the forefront screaming to the world. This is all bovine excrement coming out of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street and Israel and AIPAC. And we know it's completely bogus, and we don't support this. The blame for all of this goes right onto Washington, D.C. and Wall Street and Israel, and we will not share that blame. We will not accept responsibility for it. And that message is getting out.
Yeah, I know it is mainly the U.S. administration, but one cannot discount the financial center of the planet, London. They are really heavily involved in pushing this thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they're like a state within a state, not unlike the Vatican. I understand that a lot of the laws of England and Britain simply do not apply inside that financial district, that they're almost a state unto themselves.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you read the 1783 Paris Treaty with Prince George, by the grace of God, King of England, it clearly states that this Crown Corporation, the Crown, is the arch-treasurer to the Vatican. I mean, that's in English. Anybody can read it. It's there. And the four representatives...
I mean, without getting into the details, we know that the reason we keep having to go through all these wars is because the world is dominated by this private central banking model that pyramids on itself through the Federal Reserve, the Bank of International Settlements, all the way up to the top, where all the money is simply created out of thin air and loaned at interest. It's a Ponzi scheme. It is the cause of all of these wars, including the one we're entering into right now, or being driven into right now. All right, John, I'm going to let you go because we got a lot of stuff to cover on this show. We got to finish.
Aloha, Michael.
All right, aloha. We got to finish with Syria. We got to get on to 9/11. We got to get into a bunch of stuff. So, backtrack a little bit here. U.S. White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough admitted that there is actually no evidence that Assad had anything to do with this chemical attack. Then they're scrambling because members of Congress who saw that classified briefing saying it's a very well presented set of assertions, but none of it constitutes proof. And the attitude of the Obama administration is, what, you think the intelligence agencies of Israel and the U.S. would lie to you? Yeah, it's what they do. By way of deception, thou shalt do war, motto of the Mossad. They brag about how they lie. So the assertions of intelligence agencies are not proof and they're not authoritative. I still get a chuckle out of that ludicrous CIA animation of TWA-800 climbing into the sky without a nose, which is impossible, after the point in time where the NTSB zone reports say the wings had failed structurally. But the CIA made a cartoon, therefore it must be so. No, it isn't. So they're scrambling around trying to find other reasons to move forward with this thing. And over the weekend they came out with the common sense argument. in which the White House said, we've got all this horrible video and photographic proof that a terrible chemical weapons attack happened, which nobody's disputing. Nobody's arguing that the attack happened. And the White House came out and said, it's just common sense it was Assad. That's their new argument. Really, if you have common sense, you will believe us it was Assad. And, of course, that's complete nonsense. Now, first of all, common sense makes for very poor public policy. Common sense once said witches had to be burned. Common sense once said slavery was acceptable. Common sense is not a guide to running your foreign or domestic policy. And in fact, in the case of this Syrian gas attack, common sense points in a completely different direction. Because it never made any sense that Assad would launch a chemical weapon attack against women, children, and his own soldiers right in front of UN chemical weapons inspectors on the day they arrived. That never made sense. And nobody ever came up with a motive for Assad to do something that stupid. There's no military purpose to be had gassing women and children and his own soldiers. There is no political gain to be had. Common sense says Assad didn't do it. Now remember, last January there were emails leaked from a British defense contractor, Britham, that revealed the existence of a plan approved by the Obama White House to give chemical weapons to the hired mercenaries to use on civilians in Syria and frame Assad for it. Now, last March, when there was a chemical attack on civilians, the White House blamed it on Assad back then, only to have the United Nations investigate and say, no, it was the rebels. So common sense is telling us that if the White House was wrong last spring, it's probably wrong again today. Common sense tells us that if there is a plan to frame Assad for chemical weapons attacks sponsored by the United States, that they were trying to carry it out in March, and they're trying to carry it out again. There are dozens of videos on YouTube showing the hired mercenaries deploying chemical weapons. Turkey has caught the hired mercenaries with chemical weapons. They caught them with sarin. The victims of the attack say it was the hired mercenaries. Even the hired mercenaries are saying it was the hired mercenaries. There's no common sense at all in this White House push to frame Assad for this. But they're desperate to push this war forward into World War III. Now, a little bit review of history. In 1898, President William McKinley lied to the American people when he claimed the Spanish had sunk the USS Maine in Havana Harbor to trick Americans into war with Spain. Both the captain of the Maine and later an investigation by Admiral Hyman G. Rickover confirmed the ship had been lost to an odd-board fire. In 1915, President Woodrow Wilson lied to Americans when he claimed the Germans had attacked and sunk an innocent civilian passenger ship, the Lusitania, to trick America into World War I. Germany claimed Lusitania was carrying arms and was therefore a legitimate target of war. The German embassy even took out ads in the New York papers saying, do not sail on this ship because we are going to attack it. In 2008, divers entered the hold of the Lusitania and they found military cargo. In 1964, President Johnson lied when he claimed North Vietnam had launched torpedoes against the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin on August 4, 1964. That report was a mistake immediately rescinded by the captain, but Johnson used it to trick Congress into escalating the Vietnam War. More about this when we come back. Welcome back to the show, and let me pick up on the little discourse I was doing just before the commercial break here. And, of course, we all remember in 2003, President Bush lied to the American people when he claimed Saddam Hussein possessed nuclear weapons to trick the U.S. into war against Iraq. None were ever found. And the yellow cake documents that Bush referred to in his 2003 State of the Union speech were later exposed as forgeries by several people, including former Ambassador Joseph Wilson, which led to the Valerie Plame affair. So here's the message you need to be sharing with everybody you know. It isn't that the U.S. government lied to us about Iraq's nuclear weapons. It's that they have been lying all along. War after war after war started with lies, frauds, and deceptions. If you have not read it, I strongly recommend Day of Deceit by Navy Commander Robert B. Stinnett. And based in part on documents declassified in 1994, he lays out the case that Roosevelt knew the Japanese were coming to attack Pearl Harbor, indeed had goaded them into it following an 8-step plan authored by ONI Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. Now, Stinnett actually agrees with what Roosevelt did, and that's what makes this book so important. He's not out there to grind an axe. He's very objective. He says, yeah, I agree Roosevelt needed to do this. I don't, obviously, on that. And living here in Hawaii, I've been able to confirm quite a bit of the information in Stinnett's book, including the fact that the radioman of the Matson steamship line, SS Lurline, the radioman Leslie Grogan, was hearing the radio traffic of that Japanese strike force as it came across the Pacific, plotted a map that he gave to the Navy when the Lurline arrived in Honolulu Harbor a few days before the actual attack. And the other interesting story I've been able to confirm here locally is that there was a training cruise northwest of Oahu, just right in the path of the oncoming Japanese fleet. Roosevelt ordered the naval commander to get those ships back into port the day before the attack. If Roosevelt hadn't done that, the Japanese fleet would have run into all those American Navy ships, and the surprise would have been blown. In short, the United States government has a long history of lying to trick the American people into wars. Common sense tells us they're just doing it again. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Ed in Idaho. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ed, are you there?
You got Tony in Idaho.
Okay. Must be that darn hamster.
Well, I'll try to make this short, Michael. Early this morning, I was listening to one of the RBN shows, and I was half asleep, so I don't remember which one it was. But they said they had received information that just this morning the military had closed down one of the radar detection units, I believe it was in Texas, that could detect any incoming IBMs. They turned it right off.
Well,
you can check that out.
Well, they do have to be turned off, for periodic maintenance, and there's supposed to be sufficient overlap. But again, I understand what you're saying. We are expecting Israel or the U.S. or both to carry out some kind of a false flag attack where they can get the war against Syria and Iran and North Korea just going for real. But everybody's expecting that, which hopefully will deter them from trying that, because especially in the backlash regarding the Syria gas propaganda, they have to understand the American people aren't just going to buy the story coming out of officialdom in the corporate media. They just aren't. Ed, thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going, Mike? On Obama and Syria, I got a question for you.
Okay.
We recently had Dennis McDonough, who is White House Chief of Staff, came out and said that that Washington claims are based on the common sense test, not irrefutable evidence.
Yes.
And intelligence doesn't work like a court of law where you have to have fact. With intelligence, you use common sense. And, of course, you've talked many times about common sense tells you Assad had no reason to use chemical weapons. But what I found very interesting was we now have Assad coming out saying, look, if you attack, you better expect everything. And we also have officials in Washington and other places around the world that are saying an attack could result in hostilities, which would also involve Russia as well. But the big thing, and here's where my question comes in. I remember Nixon got impeached. Well, what happened when he got impeached? He was basically thrown out of office. Clinton, however, he supposedly gets impeached, but he gets to stay in office.
Mm-hmm.
So we had Biden here about, 3-4 weeks ago, came out and said if Obama went ahead with the strike, he would push for impeachment hearings against Obama.
Mm-hmm.
But now we got Tarpley coming out saying that if Obama does indeed go ahead with the attacks anyway, many in Washington, especially Republicans in Congress, will indeed impeach Obama.
Yes.
So now the question is, if they go ahead and impeach Obama, if he does attack and they impeach him, will they put him out of office like they did with Nixon or allow him to stay in office as they did with Reagan. And if they put him out of office like they did with Nixon, do we end up with Biden?
Well, the answer to that last part is definitely yes. Now, you need to understand Clinton was impeached, but the way impeachment works is the House brings the impeachment proceedings and then the Senate holds the trial for removal from office. And so Clinton was impeached in the House but acquitted in the Senate. I suspect that that will probably happen in the case of Obama as well. Nixon never went through the Senate trial. He resigned because the last thing anybody in Washington, D.C. wanted was somebody asking why, if Nixon's re-election was a slam dunk, which it was, why they needed to burglarize the Watergate. And that was an answer that could never be allowed out in public, because what was going on is the Democrats had gotten photos of the 3 tramps arrested in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, during John F. Kennedy's assassination, and they were clearly identifiable as E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis, who even then were working for Richard Nixon. That's why E. Howard Hunt led this burglary into the Watergate. It was his rear end that was on the line on that. So, frankly, at this point, if this attack on Syria goes ahead, I think it's time to impeach the entire government. And everybody is waiting to see how Congress is going to knuckle under to AIPAC, which is mounting this proclaimed full-court press to prove they're still in control of the Congress rather than the American people.
Well, what I don't understand, is when Obama and others have claimed that they had evidence, that it was conclusive, Assad used chemical weapons, but yet didn't the United States block or veto an action which would have required them to show that evidence?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's basically the whole thing. The U.S. government is basically resting on their reputation that, hey, we're the government and we won't lie to you, and now Americans have woken up and realized, yeah, they do pretty much every day. In fact, if this government ever caught itself telling the truth, they would tell a lie quick just to stay in practice.
Well, that makes me think, Mike, if we remember back during the Elena Kagan confirmation hearings, when Harry Reid came out and said because of new legislation that they didn't have to produce any evidence. All they had to do was just tell the court, just trust us. We can't show you the evidence. Just trust us. And this seems to fall right in line with that.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and the way I see it, I don't care if it's a court of law, a court at law, be it here in the United States or an international court. If you have evidence to prove your case, let's see the evidence, period. If you want us to support you, let's see the evidence that says Assad did it. Problem is, I don't think they got it.
No, they don't have it, because the initial claim never made any sense here. But you're absolutely right. When the government says you have to pay your money for war with Syria, you have to surrender the lives of your children to fight a war with Syria, yeah, the burden of proof is on this government because they are proven liars from previous wars. And I need to relocate that video from a little while back where Obama was up there saying, if you can't trust the government, we have a problem. And I want to put it up there with the comment, Obama, you have the problem, not we the people. Got to take a break from Phyllis Schlafly and news. We'll be back with more about Syria, more about 9/11, all this stuff. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the Obama administration and the war hawks are just out there trying to get this war moving forward, even in the face of Syria's agreeing to turn over their chemical weapons stockpiles to international controls. They're trying to backpedal. They're trying to get John Kerry out of that big bear trap he walked into. And we're seeing all kinds of just nonsensical stuff being thrown out there. This was over at Reuters reporting that Syrian forces may have used chemical weapons against civilians, but without Assad's permission. See, they're trying to backpedal and recover from the fact that they have no evidence Assad had anything to do with this. And the common sense argument is failing. And so this is the new fallback. All right, it wasn't Assad, but it was his forces who did it. That's the new spin. But if you think about it, this story is just as absurd as the original claim Assad did it, because if Assad has set a national policy of not using chemical weapons, how would low-level Syrian forces get them? It's not exactly standard issue. Every nation with chemical weapons keeps them under tight control, and Assad would be extra careful because he doesn't want the hired mercenaries to get hold of them and use them against him. So it's not like a Syrian soldier can just walk up to the supply depot and say, give me a 6-pack of sarin. And the fact that they're putting out these obviously illogical, irrational claims shows how desperate they are. And want to talk about desperation on the cusp of madness. The new one is that anybody who's opposing Obama in Syria is only doing so because they're racist. They don't like a black president, so they're not going to let him have his war. Never mind all the evidence that points to the chemical weapons attack being carried out by the hired mercenaries to frame Assad. Never mind that nobody even has a motive for Assad to carry out a chemical weapons attack on women and children. Never mind that even the hired mercenaries are saying the hired mercenaries did this. You're only opposing war with Syria because you're a racist. Everybody's trying to pound on Syria for their particular agenda. This was over at opednews.com that, Syria is really all the fault of human-caused global warming because that led to the drought that led to the revolution. No, it didn't. There's no revolution. It's a covert coup d'etat by hired mercenaries. Lindsey Graham is still out there, screaming that if we don't support the attack on Syria, we'll be nuked. We'll be nuked. The danger is coming here if you don't let us go in and crush Syria. They're advertising that they're thinking about a false flag attack here. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Ray McGovern is out there saying exactly the same thing I am. Get ready for a false flag attack to get the war wagon back on track. Ray McGovern is saying likely possibility, staged attack on the U.S. destroyers or attack on Syria itself, made to look like it's coming from the American destroyers, and Israel appears to have tried that back on September 3rd with that bogus missile test. And again, there are no unannounced missile tests under international treaties which Israel has signed. Missile tests are announced ahead of time to make sure civilian traffic can get out of the way in case something goes wrong, which it often does with a test. So they're screaming false flag, false flag, false flag. New York Times got caught putting out completely bogus information about Syria, having learned nothing from their embarrassment over Iraq. Meanwhile, we have high-level U.S. intelligence officers who are saying that the evidence that does exist overwhelmingly points to the hired mercenaries doing this. The German press is out there saying Assad did not order the Syria chemical weapons attack based on phone calls intercepted by a German surveillance ship and deployed off the Syrian coast. The intercepted communications they got suggest Assad was caught by this completely by surprise, just like everybody else. Now, there has been a Belgian writer who was held hostage for 5 months in Syria by the hired mercenaries. He was set free a couple of days ago. He's now gone public saying his captors, the hired mercenaries, were talking amongst themselves saying that, yeah, this was done by the hired mercenaries to be blamed on Assad. So the White House earlier today deployed Susan Rice, who lied to us about Benghazi, to make the case for Syria, and now they're deploying Hillary Clinton, who lied to us about Benghazi, to push the case for Syria. Just completely amazing here. Now, article that just appeared in ZeroHedge.com. U.S. refuses to admit checkmate by Russia and Syria, redirects purpose of military incursion, admits regime change intention. In other words, they're basically saying, you caught us, this wasn't really about the gas attack. We just hate Assad and we want him out of there. They're digging themselves in deeper. Susan Rice is tweeting out there, failing to respond means more and more Syrians will die from Assad's poisonous stockpiles. White House tweet, we have seen what happens when the world fails to respond, blah, 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 blah. Susan Rice saying opening door to chemical weapons threatens the United States. Rice says chemical weapons could be used even within the United States. Rice says Assad attack threatens global security, U.S. included. They're basically trying to say that if you if you don't allow the U.S. government to attack Syria, there will be terror attacks here in the United States of America. That's the new meme. And we just know that when Obama goes on TV tomorrow night on the evening before the anniversary of 9/11, he's going to be waving 9/11 around. And that's raising on a busted flush because more and more polls are coming out showing Americans don't believe the official story on 9/11 any longer. And Obama's just following a policy of if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Now, Kerry is out there trying to resell the strike by pulling back on its scope. We were hearing over the last couple of days that it's going to be much wider than originally planned. They're getting ready to deploy Marines on the ground there. Kerry's saying we can't rule out boots on the ground. Now they're back to saying, really, it's just a little teensy attack. You really shouldn't be on all a fuss. I mean, it's just going to be unbelievably small. That's Kerry's words. Unbelievably small. Limited airstrike and no boots on the ground. Gee, that sort of sounds like the Japanese plan for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Limited airstrike and no boots on the ground, and look how that turned out. Pentagon is out there saying not retaliating in Syria sends the wrong message to the world. Now, the word retaliate means to make an attack or assault in return for a similar attack. The United States has not been attacked. The United States has not been attacked. The United States has not been attacked. There is no retaliation possible. We were not attacked by Iraq. We were not attacked by Afghanistan. We've not been attacked by Yemen. We've not been attacked by Pakistan. And we have not been attacked by Syria or Iran. But they're using that word retaliate like we should all just stand up and say, oh, yes, we have to strike back at the bastards. The White House is now admitting they don't actually have evidence Assad was behind the gas attack. Just take our word. We just sort of know it. Miss Cleo looked into her Ouija board and told us it was Assad, and that's, by golly, good enough for us. Now, I know that all you Pentagon types have got those nice, cushy bunkers you can run into and hide should the worst happen. Because an attack on Syria would mean they're then justified in using their chemical weapons back against us. And Iran's already said they're going to come in. China said they're going to come in. Russia said they're going to come in. And they're betting this whole thing on John McCain's claim that the Russian and the Chinese don't have the balls to go to war. But I prefer not to be caught in the backlash for this U.S. unprovoked attack on yet another country that has not attacked us. It's really what it comes down to. All right, we got calls waiting on the line. When we come back from these commercials, we will start taking phone calls. America, welcome back to the show. Even Haaretz is now running a story that the rebels were behind the chemical weapon attack. This thing is crumbling. Just collapsing out from underneath Obama and the war hawks. And hey, if you want war with Syria, you got 2 daughters. Give them the rifles, put them in parachutes, send them on over there, along with John McCain and Lindsey Graham and everybody else who's out there. By the way, you need to keep up the pressure on Congress, because today AIPAC is launching its mammoth campaign. They're out there bragging on how they are going to hijack Congress away from the will of the American people and, by golly, force this war on Syria on us. They're bragging about it. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Bob in Tranquility. The Bob has landed. Aloha and welcome to your show,
yes.
to my show. What's on your mind? I'm so tired.
Hey, Michael, keep up the good work, and the IRS was after me many years ago.
You should see the emails I'm getting. The IRS is hassling everybody right now. It's just open season on the American people.
Be that as it may, couple issues. One, 1991, George Herbert Walker Bush proposed to Congress a law which the Democratic Congress signed on to about we will no longer support the Democratic Republic of Yugoslavia. So the Democrats passed it, Bush signed it, that immediately precipitated the war in Yugoslavia. Slovenia and Croatia immediately resigned. Kosovo had the largest supply, or the largest and richest mines west of Siberia. The problem with Yugoslavia, as with many of the other companies of the Axis of Evil, is the money from those mines went back to the people of Yugoslavia.
Oh, we can't have that. You know, that's like Hugo Chavez taking Venezuela's oil money and giving it to the Venezuelan people. What kind of commie thinking is that?
Exactly. But what I got to me was when they went on about Bill Clinton and this trivial pursuit of the stains on the dress, Monica Lewinsky's dress, and he said, I did not have sex with that woman.
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's got to be something more to this.
Oh,
well,
there was.
The day after the impeachment floundered and failed, he started to bomb, in essence, abusing his presidential privileges and powers to bomb a foreign nation illegally. And it's interesting that he supported the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was funded by the Albanian drug dealers who got their drugs from Afghanistan, protected by the U.S. military, and laundered by the U.S., money laundered by the U.S. banks.
Well,
next to that, yesterday I was... Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, you're absolutely right. The reason Ken Starr put all the focus onto Monica Lewinsky and Oval Office Hummers and the rest of it is because the real scandal behind all of that whitewater goes back to Iran-Contra, where covert elements of the CIA were manufacturing M16s without serial numbers on them and then flying them down.
Reed was the man.
Yes.
Harry Reid working out of Mena, Arkansas with Barry Seal.
Exactly right, and they were sending the weapons down to the Nicaraguan Contras, and they were funding the operation by smuggling vast amounts of cocaine back into the United States of America. The cocaine was being sold. It was being laundered through all these savings and loans and land flip deals and the rest of it, and that was the part that Ken Starr had to hide, because all of this CIA drug smuggling goes back to Ronald Reagan and his Attorney General, William French Smith, who signed the authorization for the CIA to be involved for intelligence purposes with drug smugglers and not have to report it to the Drug Enforcement Administration. It was the CIA's license to smuggle. And William French Smith's assistant, when he was doing all of this, was a young Ken Starr. That's why Ken Starr was put on this thing, to misdirect everybody and get them looking at stains on a blue dress and not look at the real scandal of government-sanctioned, government-operated drug smuggling into the United States of America to sell the drugs to our children and just make gobs of money off of, not just to fund the Sandinistas, the Contras, but vast amounts of that money went into the Clinton presidential campaign. And within 6 months of Bill Clinton taking office, 4 of his top fundraisers, who were known for just bringing in bags of cash, all died under mysterious circumstances, the most famous of which, of course, was Vincent Foster, who was suicided and the body dumped in Fort Marcy Park, which is the incident that accidentally got me onto this path of being a blogger and a truth activist.
Also he was the only governor in all 50 states that ran a state agency, the Arkansas Redevelopment Finance Commission, which laundered the CIA's money to the tune of $100 million per month.
That was exactly right. And the actual name is the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, where...
Finance Authority, that's it. Yep, that's the one.
The money was coming in. It was issued out the door, disguised as loans to launder it, and at the end of the month they'd simply zero out the books. So there was never any repayment coming back in, and that was the money distribution, money laundering system. Webb Hubbell set it up. Bill Clinton signed it into law, and because it was his state agency, he also signed all those loan checks going out the door. And so, yeah, it was just neck deep in CIA drug trafficking and money, and that's what Ken Starr was there to protect. And he dangled a little tawdry sex scandal in front of us all to keep us from looking at the real scandal. Because, frankly, I don't care if a president's catching a little on the side. I really don't care about that at all. But when you have a president, when you have 3 presidents, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, who are all tangled up with massive drug smuggling and covert actions outside the approval of Congress, that's a problem that affects us all.
Exactly. But the second issue I wanted to bring up was I constantly hear the echoes of the domino effect. If we don't strike Syria, this chaos will spread to its neighboring countries. Haven't I heard that before?
Oh, they're trying it already. If we don't strike Syria, Iran will attack us. If we don't strike Syria, North Korea will attack us. If we don't strike Syria, there are going to be gas and nuclear bombs here in the United States of America. I mean, If we weren't talking about World War III, it would almost be a comedy to watch these people doing it.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Mike. That's all I have to say.
All right.
Keep up the good work and keep the faith, whatever it might be.
As long as I possibly can, and we're going to switch over to Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, how you doing?
Well, for a Monday.
Okay. I'm going to make this quick. I'm going to start out with Jimmy Carter and do this in 1 minute. Jimmy Carter was played as a fool. He was one of the best presidents and most honest person we had in the White House. All right. Interest rates went up to 22%. All of a sudden, when Reagan got in office, the banks went bankrupt. We had to bail them out. What the hell would they do with all that money back when they were getting the 22%? Okay? As far as, now we're going to go forward, okay?
Yes.
Okay, 207, now they do it again. They go bankrupt again. We're going to bail out. It's Wall Street money, okay? Right. And this is going on. And this is what's going on right now. We know it, and I know it, and you know it. It's Wall Street. It's the Federal Reserve. They want this war. They want it for money, okay?
Yes.
And that's all it is.
Yes.
And people need to know that Jimmy Carter was an honest and a truthful man.
He was out of his depth. It was because he was an honest man. He was completely unprepared for what he ran into. He was a reactionary president to Richard Nixon's crimes and corruptions. And when he got into Washington, D.C., he was just totally out of his depth in terms of the underhanded, dirty playing that the Washington establishment is capable of. There was that whole October surprise deal. He was a good man, but he was definitely outclassed by... I'm looking for a word I can use without losing the radio station license. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And if you're sensing a tremendous similarity between the Obama rush to war with Syria and Bush's rush to war with Iraq, you're very perceptive because they're using the same tactics of unfounded allegations and a practice called stovepiping, which is to take the intelligence being provided from certain select sources like Israel and immediately presenting it as national policy while bypassing America's own intelligence agencies. And a lot of those agencies' officials are now saying the evidence isn't there. They're being bypassed again. Bush did that during Iraq. Oh, we've got this piece of paper that says they're buying yellow cake, and we've got this other stuff, and we don't need to listen to our own 16 intelligence agencies to verify this. We're absolutely sure. And, of course, even back then, the U.S. intelligence agencies were saying the case had not been made. And they're doing it again, and they actually think you, the American people, are stupid enough to fall for it a second time, and you have to stand up and prove them wrong. Now, Bashar Assad had an interview with Charlie Rose in which he said the U.S. should expect every action in response to an attack on Syria. He's basically saying, yeah, we're going to fight back. Of course they're going to fight back. Wouldn't you? If somebody's shooting at you, don't you shoot back? We've already heard members of the administration saying that, because this is a punitive strike, Syria had better not shoot back at us or that will escalate the situation. And that's how they're going to escalate this war and try and get Iran into it. They're going to send in the cruise missiles at $1.5 million a pop that you paid for. And they'll start blowing stuff up in Syria. And when Syria starts shooting back, they're going to say, how dare Assad shoot at us while we're bombing his country? How dare he dare to dare to dare? This means war. We're going to go to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, we're baking in about, I love it, this global warming, about 94 here in Wisconsin today, and I'm sad to say my garden is looking beautiful. Michael, I wanted to make 2 points, and I wanted you to, I don't know if you covered this gentleman in the past, that was meeting with one of the big top Rockefellers. It's a great video. But anyways, I wanted to say this comment first. What happened, let me quiz you, what happened back in 1991 on 9/11? Do you remember back then what happened?
No, I can't say that I do.
Senior Bush sticking his hand across the table to Mr. Gorbachev for the New World Order. Yes, back in 1991 on 9/11. And then isn't it something, Michael? 10 years later, who's president and what's the date? That's my first one. Another thing, if people want to, you were talking about Wesley Snipes of his situation of where he was talking about all these nations going to. There's another guy that I followed. It was called Aaron Russo.
Oh, yeah.
Aaron Russo was the one that made Mad as Hell. And he was a great guy talking to exploit this stuff. And people should check out that movie with him before he was suspiciously died after he was...
Okay, now, Scott. Okay, Aaron Russo passed away from cancer. We actually had him on my show shortly before he passed away, and because he knew he was dying of cancer, he felt that he had nothing to lose by making his movie, which is called America, Freedom to Fascism, and if you have not seen it, you must look at it. It is an absolutely damning indictment of this whole fraud of the Federal Reserve, and it's all about the money junkies hijacking this nation away from its founding principles and turning it into a big cash cow for the money junkies. Aaron Russo was a producer. He worked on The Rose and Trading Places, the Eddie Murphy movie, and he's a very, very good producer, but his finest work, in my opinion, is America from Freedom to Fascism, and we'll reprise that to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com on the next commercial break. So we do have to be a little bit careful here. There wasn't anything unexpected or mysterious about Aaron Russo's death. He suffered from cancer for many, many years. He was suffering from cancer when he made that movie, Freedom to Fascism.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, Michael, I don't know if it is in the Freedom of Fashion where he was standing next to the Rockefeller telling him, we want to go in, and we want to go into North Korea, we want to go into Afghanistan, and Aaron Russo goes, why do you want to do that? And you know what, Michael, here's the reality of it. I'll put the nail in the coffin right here. If you go down to Georgia, there's 3 stones standing. And the words on those stones are written about 500 million people they want left when they get done destroying what they're doing right now. It's right there on those stones. So post those on your website too. It's written right down in there.
Well, I understand. We've heard about the Georgia Guidestones here, and yes, there appears to be a lot of similarity between their declared agenda and what's going on in the world, but that doesn't necessarily connect the two, maybe completely cause a relationship. I really do want to stay focused right now on the fact that the White House is clearly thrashing, trying to sell a war with Syria to the Congress, and certainly it's failing miserably with the American people. And we need to be on guard for a false flag attack by the U.S. and or Israel, because, again, as I pointed out on this show, and pointed out in my presentation on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, lying about Saddam's nuclear weapons was not an isolated, unique incident. It is business as usual for this government. They rule you with lies, fraud, and deception. They've been getting away with it for generations and generations, and I guess it must come as quite a emotional, psychic shock that all of a sudden it isn't working any longer. But they don't know what else to do, so they're trying to continue on down the same path. Okay?
Just right, Mike. I was just trying to talk about. I'm clearly with you on that, Syria. I'm totally awake like you, Mike. But I was just going back to reflect on another gentleman, which I'm glad to hear that you had him on there. But you're exactly right. It goes back, and you're hitting the nail on the head when I talked to you many years ago about this global thing of if you don't accept the American dollar bill, we're coming in with our military, and look at what's happening right now. So take care, Mike, and thanks for taking my call, and you be safe and keep up the good work.
All right, I will, just as long as I can. Just as long as I can. All righty, let's see. Of course, Iran has already said they're going to come in and aid Syria if there's an attack. Russia's already said that. China's already said that. France has gotten a bad case of cold feet, saying that, they're all in favor of the U.S. going to war against Syria, but they're going to have to sit it out because their economy can't support it. France is already involved in these, Bretton Woods interventions in 16 different countries around the world. And they're saying they don't have the money to go into Syria. So, hail, stout fellow, and well met, go help yourself, but they're going to sit that one out. Meanwhile, China and Russia are continuing to pour war supplies and ships into the region. Cyprus, and again, we were talking the other day about this feint of supposed Syrian bombers flying toward Cyprus and then turning around as soon as the tornadoes launched. Nobody actually saw what airplanes they were. It is merely assumed or proclaimed or asserted they were from Syria. But Cyprus has ruled out any use of its territory for a U.S.-led strike on Syria. So Syria isn't going to be sending any airplanes towards Cyprus because Cyprus is off the board. It's probably another attempt by Israel to fan things up and get things, going crazy again here. Everybody knows this is all about money. Story and investment watch blog. War with Syria is imminent, and it's all about saving the bankrupt fiat money system. Get ready for Syrian false flag on USA, meaning it'll be blamed on Syria, but it's going to be the U.S. and or Israel. Gilad Atzmon came out with a really, really good article on this whole thing about AIPAC being out there at the forefront of selling this war to the U.S. Congress, called On AIPAC and Patriotism. And he reminds us that this was the same lobby that pushed and pushed and pushed for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And they're all hot and bothered. Israel's all hot and bothered for war on all these countries as long as somebody else has to fight and die in them. And I want to give you some headlines and some sources here about what's really going on. Unfortunately, we're coming up on a commercial break, and I don't want to get into this until we get back here. So I'm just going to vamp until the commercials start here. We're going to be break for about 4 minutes. I'm going to come back. I'm going to be taking AIPAC out to the woodshed, and so should you. AIPAC and Israel want this war, and they're betting their reputation they can hijack the U.S. Congress away from we the people. And we have to stand up and prove they cannot. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Listen, you were talking about why France was getting cold feet. And from what I heard, and this is just a rumor, but when John Kerry called up the French president, all he said was, "What do you think about going on a strike?" And, of course, they went crazy. No Frenchmen would turn down a strike at all until they found out it was a military strike.
Oh, come on.
That's when they...
Yeah, come on. No, what's going on here is Hollande understands the majority of the French people are as opposed to this war on Syria as the American people. They recognize that the official U.S. story about Syria is a big heap of merde. And Hollande does not even dare take it to the French legislature, lest he be embarrassed the way David Cameron was. And so this idea they can't afford to do it is a very convenient, pragmatic excuse people are going to buy. But it's really the recognition that this is probably the most unpopular rush to war in all of modern history, and nobody's buying the official story.
It's got so many holes in it. I voted for Obama.
I actually supported him over Mitt Romney because I still think Mitt Romney would have been worse and we would have been into these wars even more intense. But I think, like most of Obama's supporters, I'm horribly, horribly disappointed in him.
Same here, and I can't buy the lies. I do have one question for you.
Yeah.
On a different subject.
Yes.
I have been looking on the internet to find out an answer to this question. Maybe you know it off the top of your head. I cannot find anywhere in Al-Qaeda's history that it has ever launched an attack within Israel on Israelis.
Funny how you noticed that. Now, there was at one point an Al-Qaeda cell that was inside Gaza, and when the Palestinians arrested him, it turned out they grabbed a bunch of Mossad agents.
Now, why would Al-Qaeda, who hates Israelis more than anybody on earth, never attack Israel?
Al-Qaeda is a complete front. It's like Emmanuel Goldstein. It's a made-up enemy on which to say, oh, we have to go to war against Al-Qaeda, except when they're on our side. But Al-Qaeda in Arabic literally means the base, and it's thought to have originated with the database of the Mujahideen fighters who aided the United States in Charlie Wilson's war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. But in Arabic slang, Al-Qaeda means a toilet. And Araisha
Well, I read.
Yeah, and Araisha al-Qaeda means I'm going to the bathroom. Now, if you were forming this big terror group to strike fear into the heart of the great Satan of the Western powers, would you call yourself the toilet? Of course you wouldn't.
No.
It's completely made up. And there have been people, even Hillary Clinton at one point said, yeah, we created al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda is our boogeyman so we can make our federal government bigger.
That's exactly right.
And I read an article by Zygmunt, I can never say his name right, Brzezinski, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And he said, when he helped create Mujahideen in the 70s under Carter, that his strategy was he called an arc of chaos. He wanted to make the Middle East, he wanted to inoculate the Middle East from ever turning to communism. That's when the Soviet Empire was still around. And he said the only way to do it was to radicalize it, make Islamic radicals out of leaders, because secular governments could easily be toppled by Soviet infiltration, especially in bad business cycles, down economies.
Yes.
But radical Islam was the ultimate inoculation from communism. So he helped fund a lot of the madrasas back in the 70s that turned out radical Islamists. And now we're reaping that harvest.
Well, the war ultimately is between fascism and communism. Capitalism is a nice-sounding situation of a mid-course, but obviously in the United States, capitalism has devolved down to outright fascism. And it's really, there's no good side, bad side, good guy, bad guy. It is always a conflict between those who think that all human beings have an equal right to the shares of life's joys and pleasures, versus those who think they should own it all and everybody else has to pay rent to them for it. And that's really the conflict that's at the heart of all of this stuff that's gone on, for 300 years now. It's a war between the fascists and the communists. And, I hate to have to choose between either one of those systems, but obviously I'm not approving of fascism, certainly not as it's practiced in the United States.
And we have to get the money supply out of the hands of the international bankers, or else all our efforts will be in vain.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And the really sick, twisted irony about this is we are enslaved to the very same kind of banking system that we fought the revolution to be free of, and now we're trying to force it on the rest of the world, forcing it on the rest of the world with U.S. military arms. We're on the wrong side of this war. Where, future history is 50 years from now, they're going to look back at the stars and bars with the same loathing and revulsion that our generation looked on the swastika. Okay?
I appreciate it, Mike.
All right. Gonna let you go here. All righty. Interesting announcement from Susan Rice, our National Security Advisor, saying that the United States could consider holding an international conference on Syria, but not until after the U.S. attacks. Well, if you're going to go ahead and attack Syria and attack Assad, what's the point of having an international conference? To stand around and brag, look, we went in and we just smashed him. They're trying to still have the illusion of some kind of legitimacy and international cooperation. But basically what Susan Rice is saying, yeah, you want to talk about Syria, we'll talk about Syria, but only after we've gone in and bombed the place. It's a little sick. Of course, this whole administration and their war lust is just incredibly sick here. All right, I want to get back onto the situation with AIPAC. AIPAC, of course, stands for the America-Israel Political Affairs Committee. It is a foreign policy lobby that pushes for Israel's agenda in the United States of America. They are notorious for spying on Americans on behalf of Israel. They are notorious for using their financial muscle to basically buy Congress out from under the American people. And it's embarrassing to the United States that every election cycle you will see American candidates, the first thing they do is they travel over to Israel to get that obligatory picture of themselves touching the Wailing Wall, and then they come back on in and they go over to AIPAC's annual conference and say, oh yes, we will do what you tell us, please give us the money, please use your media influence, please let us have the job of congressman, senator, or president. And it's embarrassing to the American people. Well, now, of course, the American people are awake to the fact that this government is lying to get us into a war. Congress, as of right now, does not have the votes to pass a war resolution. There's even talk the House will not even bring it to a vote so that they don't embarrass the president. And AIPAC is out there openly proclaiming that they are going to hijack the U.S. Congress away from the will of you, the American people, and force them to vote for war. Some headlines here. Antiwar.com. AIPAC defense contractors promise to go all out pushing Syria war. TheGuardian.com. U.S. Jewish leaders petition Congress to authorize Syria strike. Haaretz.com. AIPAC to deploy hundreds of lobbyists to push for Syria action. So we already talked about that one here. AIPAC to mount major lobbying blitz for Obama's Syria strike plan. That was over at the Jerusalem Post. Do you get it yet? Israel is pushing the U.S. Congress to declare a war on Syria that your children will die in and your great-grandchildren will still be paying the price for. Now, if Israel wants a war with Syria, help yourself. Go ahead. I don't care. But Israel is out there pushing for war with Syria, just like back in 2008 they were pushing for war with Iraq, just like they're always pushing for war with Iran. Israel loves a good war, as long as they can get somebody else to fight it for them. Kerry's grasping at straws, trying to build the illusion of international support for this thing. He's out there saying Saudi Arabia okays a strike on Syria. All right, then let Saudi Arabia do it. Just disgusted with this entire government right now. Got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Joining us on the air right now is Karen Tostado from United We Strike. Aloha, Karen. What's going on with you today?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. Well, I just want to say that murder is immoral. And every day that we continue to ignore the fact that we are sending our sons and daughters to murder other people, government-sanctioned murder, we're not realizing that the true prisoners of war are our families who are in the military, who are forced to obey these immoral orders. And at United We Strike, what we're encouraging people to do is, what would you do to stop a war? If this had happened to your family member, if they were being slaughtered by drones at a wedding, we would not feel that anything was more important than addressing this. And until we collectively, as human beings, recognize murder is immoral, we go to sleep with blood on our hands every night. So we're asking people to prepare this week and to begin a boycott and concerted strike on the 15th for as long as it takes. Let's pull our money out of the markets. Let's pull ourselves out of their systems, out of the banks, cash in. What would happen if the people in Wall Street who are sitting at home, or no, us, the investors, said, you know what, my freedom is worth more. Let's crash their system instead of waiting for the false flag that will do it to us.
Well, I'm absolutely in agreement. I think now's the time definitely to look at general strikes because they did prove to be so effective when Gandhi was getting the British out of India. More than the 15th, though, I think we should basically be calling on all Americans on the day that Obama attacks Syria. You empty your bank account, you dump your stock portfolio, and you just pull everything out.
There you go.
Take it home. On the day of the attack, everybody pulls their money out of the banking system.
That's a great idea. One of the reasons, though, for the 15th, for a day that's already being utilized, is that the prisoners of war, the military people, the police who are still wearing uniforms, this is a day that if we can get on the same page, at least monthly, to make it a mass action day, what would happen if they truly stepped out of their uniforms and into their oaths, which means that they would be pursuing those who were giving the immoral orders. And the president, why do we even allow ourselves to have a Congress with a 9% approval rating? Come on, let's get real.
Well, it's not like we allow ourselves to have a Congress. This is the Congress. This is the Congress that AIPAC has orchestrated for us, and it's definitely no longer under the will of the people. And I think what Americans need to be thinking about right now is, now that they're awake that this government lies to us to get our money, to get our kids for wars, to get our agreement to all kinds of nonsensical things like global warming and carbon taxes. How long are you going to live with a government that lies to you on such an obvious scale here? And at what time do you come to understand that this government has, through these lies, delegitimized itself completely? It is not the legal government of this land. It's certainly not constitutional. The legal government of this land has to comply with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The legal government of this land has to tell the truth to the American people, because it's not in the Constitution that the government can lie to you.
Well, I think they've got the first three letters down. This government has the con part down. But murder is immoral, and when we stand together and say no more, we can demand that they send all troops home to their countries to not only get the attention that they so deserve, but also to help us hold those accountable who brought us here and to recreate our world locally. We can demand that they send our troops home and stop murder when enough of us stand together. So if we start on the 15th, or if they do the strike beforehand, I'm all with you, Michael. Whenever they do it, when that straw finally breaks the camel's back, we can have great power through resistance and an immediate reaction instead of waiting to think someone else is going to pick up the ball. They're not. We need to save ourselves and get rid of the fraudulent banking debt. We need to get rid of everyone in this treasonous government, really clean house, and begin again on the local level without the federal government's interference.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're at that point. And what's really alarming about this is that the federal government appears willing to risk provoking, a revolution within this country with this insane war policy. And I know they see themselves as already prepared to deal with a mass violent uprising of the American people. That's why I've been cautioning against it. But there is so much anger out there right now. Are they really willing to risk rioting all across America with people racing to burn down those Federal Reserve branches or marching on Capitol Hill? Are they really willing to risk that? Because even if they are militarily able to put that revolution down, it certainly ends the U.S. federal government's illusion of being a democracy or even a republic anymore. It's just another...
Well, that's why we have a different option as well. Empty streets would send such a signal of silence. It has never been heard yet, but it would be around the world if we stayed home and realized nothing is more important than protecting our homes and our families. Let's take the day together to turn off the television and to do some real research. It's on a Sunday, and then think about, murder is immoral. Do you want to support that? Do you want to support Common Core that's coming to spend all this money on structuralizing how they can really brainwash your child instead of allowing your child to have a good education? We're in the toilet in so many levels. How long will we continue?
Yeah, we can't continue. We can't continue. We can see the end of this policy being followed by the U.S. federal government is an all-out global world war, which will include conflict with Russia and China, because Russia and China are adamant they will not go back to a world dominated by Bretton Woods. They just won't.
And they shouldn't. None of us should. We have to really wake up and understand that when we go to sleep at night, we've got blood on our hands every single night that we obey criminals.
You're right about that. By paying for these wars, by paying for innocent Iraqis to be tortured to death to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist, we are all being made accessories after the fact to all of this government's war crimes, and I don't like that. I refuse to be an accessory to the crimes of this government any longer.
We're also accessories to them being able to crucify heroes, people who are whistleblowers, Bradley Manning. Instead of people giving the orders, and we've turned truth into an insult. Well, it's time to wake up. So we've got like a week. If nothing happens beforehand, I'd like to encourage your listeners to think, You know, what would I do if my son had been at that wedding in Yemen when it was bombed? You know, how would I feel? Would I still want to put on my clothes and go to work knowing that the criminals who orchestrated this, if I'm working for a big multinational corporation, are profiting off of every dollar I make, which is going more toward destruction than toward life? And these soldiers who are now coming out on Facebook and hiding their faces but showing their feelings on the card there, should we not honor their commitment and their oath of office and encourage them to keep that oath, which is to protect the country, but to step out of their uniforms into their lives, because the military-industrial complex is totally out of control, and we need to simply say no. And if we prepare now and we begin an open-ended boycott and strike on a Sunday, they might not notice Sunday, but they'll notice Monday, and they'll notice Tuesday. And what are your children being taught in school anyway? And why are we paying these huge salaries to a few people when there's enough to go around?
Okay.
It's time to bust a move.
We gotta let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break here, and you're absolutely right about what's being taught our children in school, because we have that report out of Baltimore where they are using the public school system to teach children how to ignore those pesky 9/11 truth people. So we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more about Syria and the federal government after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Interesting story came out of Newsmax.com. Lawmakers, leading policy experts tell Newsmax Obama's miscues have damaged the presidency. Now, we were hearing all last week about how the attack on Syria had to happen, right, wrong, good, or bad, because once the president says this is going to happen, it has to go forward in order to maintain his credibility with the world. Well, you maintain your credibility by not lying, not by going out and saying, you know, I've stated I'm going to hit my thumb with a hammer. Well, now that I said it, I got to do it. Pound on the thumb to prove your credibility. But the problem is actually far worse than that. And by the way, I did find that YouTube video of Obama up there saying, if you can't trust the government, we've got a problem. And I put it up there with a comment, you've got a problem. Because it isn't just the presidency that's been damaged by this. The clumsy lie about Syria's Assad gassing women and children in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors has eclipsed Bush's lie about Saddam's nuclear weapons and destroyed the credibility of the entire federal government. Politics is perception, and Americans are now awake, angry, and they're starting to examine everything this government has ever claimed, looking for evidence of falsehood. And of course, once you're actually looking for evidence of lies, fraud, and deception, you find it. It's a target-rich environment when you go out there and actually think about whether these claims made sense. And looking for the obvious inconsistencies, looking for things that should be there and aren't. Immediately, it's obvious that these were lies. Propaganda isn't designed to survive careful, critical analysis. It's designed to give those who don't want to think about what the government is doing an excuse not to think at all. But the list of U.S. government lies is endless. And now people are looking for reasons to disbelieve the government, not trust the government. And people are starting to realize that we here in the independent media, we've got something to say that's worth listening to, and have had that all along. And they're not willing to dismiss us and ignore us and trivialize us because the government says, oh, they're a bunch of conspiracy theorists. Because the conspiracy theorists were right, weren't we? Which brings us to 9/11. Wednesday is the anniversary. Another video that we put up at the front page of whatreallyhappened.com is Obama out there saying, you know, you should never challenge the official 9/11 story. Too late, Barack. We already have. And the polls are showing the majority of Americans do not believe the official U.S. government story of 9/11. Daily Kos is out there attacking us, saying the 9/11 truthers, they're dummies. How dare they? And, of course, we know that Daily Kos is very much tied in with Israel. And we know that Israel's fingerprints are all over 9/11. For one thing, the only people actually arrested near the World Trade Towers on the day of the attack turned out to be Mossad agents. You know, the so-called dancing Israelis, and they were out there videotaping the whole thing, high-fiving, cheering, and dancing, and they got arrested. They were working for Urban Moving System as their cover. It's a very popular cover with Israeli agents. And they were very quickly sent back to Israel. They're big celebrities over there. They were on TV saying our purpose was to document the event, which is interesting because the video that those Israelis were shooting of the World Trade Towers is still classified to this very day. And the word from inside sources is the reason that videotape is still classified to this very day is because it shows the first plane impact on the towers, which means they knew it was going to happen. Had the camera up on the tripod, just looking at the shot, documenting the event. They knew ahead of time. Apparently over on Daily Kos, there is a blanket prohibition. You will not discuss alternative theories of 9/11 here at Daily Kos. Mythbusters actually had that same prohibition on their blog as well. Biggest myth of all, they won't touch it. They don't dare touch it here. So let's talk a little bit about 9/11 and the reasons why so many people have come to understand that the official story is USDA choice bovine excrement. And for me, what really clinched it, that this was a government false flag operation, was the Secret Service at Booker Elementary School. The dog that did not bark. And if you're not sure what the reference is, it's a reference to a Sherlock Holmes story, The Silver Blaze, where Sherlock Holmes deduces that the owner of the home committed the crime, because in the dark of night while the crime was being committed, the dog did not bark. And the only reason for the dog not to bark is that he knew who the intruder was. And we've got exactly the same thing down at Booker Elementary School. George Bush is down there reading about pet goats. Andy Card comes in and tells him the second World Trade Tower has been struck. It's at that point in time where Bush says he himself knew the United States was under attack, and presumably so would the United States Secret Service Protective Detail. And they let him sit there. Now, Bush's presence at the school was in the media 3 days ahead of time. In theory, under the official story, there was an unknown number of airplanes flying over the eastern United States crashing into buildings. Part of the confusion was that just by an amazing coincidence, there was a NORAD drill taking place simulating the hijacking of 30 planes flying across the country crashing into buildings. That's why when you listen to the air traffic controllers on 9/11, you hear them keep asking, is this a real hijacking or part of the drill? They were kept intentionally confused by this NORAD drill. So nobody knew officially how many planes were flying over the United States, which ones were real, which ones were part of the drill. And there is an airport only 4 miles away from Booker Elementary School. Now you would think the Secret Service Protective Detail, which doesn't care if the children get upset, doesn't care if the teachers get upset, they have one and only job to protect the life of the president, they would have grabbed him, thrown him in that giant armored limousine, the Beast, and started driving in a random direction to foil a possible inbound. But they didn't do that. All of those United States Secret Service Protective Detail people just stood there, letting Bush read about pet goats until it was time for him to make his speech about the terror attacks. From their inaction, it is obvious the United States Secret Service Protective Detail knew President Bush was not a target that day. And the only way they could know that is if they knew ahead of time what the targets were going to be. Quod erat demonstrandum, the Bush administration was part of the plot of 9/11 here. Now, we've all seen the video of World Trade Center 7 collapsing into its own footprint. And a lot of people missed it. In the version that was out on TV, if you look very carefully up at top, where there's this little sort of a penthouse, it's actually the top of the elevator shaft, where all the motors and reels and everything. And in the video that was on the American TV networks, that little extra part just pops off instantaneously, and then the building collapsed. Well, anybody who knows video editing No, something was taken out from there. And we finally found the video that included the missing part. And you can clearly hear the sounds of an explosion coming from World Trade Center 7 as it collapses into its own footprint. Every demolition expert in the world looking at that video says, yeah, that's a controlled demolition. Flight 93 was supposed to be the plane that crashed into that building to bring it down. But Flight 93 appears that the crew and the passengers regained control of the aircraft, and it had to be shot down in Pennsylvania. So we've got the sounds of the explosion. We've got the scars of cutter charges on the load-bearing members. Even more when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And somebody listening to the show just sent in an email to remind me about how George W. Bush, on 2 separate occasions in speeches, stated he saw the first airplane hit the first tower of the World Trade Center on television while he was riding over to Booker Elementary School. He said it twice. Now, there was obviously no live television commercial coverage of the World Trade Tower when that first plane hit it, because who would know to put a camera on it other than those Israelis? And Bush was already in the classroom reading about pet goats when the second plane hit. So he didn't see that on TV either. So either he's just smoking opium, or he had a closed-circuit feed to watch that first plane impact. Now, speaking of video coverage of the World Trade Towers, and we did mention this earlier in the show, and this is another piece of information that you should have available with you to talk about 9/11 as we come up on the anniversary, especially with people who are not getting, they're just now getting introduced to the independent media. The BBC, and also Fox News, but primarily the BBC, reported that World Trade Center building number 7, the Solomon Brothers building, had collapsed. It hadn't. In the BBC video, it's still seen standing behind the BBC correspondent in New York. BBC reported the building as having collapsed 26 minutes before it happened. And, of course, BBC has no explanation for that. And there was no reason to even presume it was going to collapse, because prior to 9/11 and since, no steel-framed skyscraper has collapsed from fire. Building 7 was never hit by an airplane, and the fires in Building 7 were just a couple of small office fires. It looked like somebody ran around setting some fires in the building to make it look like it was going to come crashing down. But it wasn't a major conflagration. And Building 7, because it housed federal government offices, was built much stronger and more fireproof and bomb-proof than the normal building code for New York City. And so the idea that it would come down from fire is completely ridiculous. And nobody had any grounds to say, oh, we were thinking it was going to come down. Nobody could possibly know, because at that time in history, no steel-framed building had collapsed from fire. Giuliani got an early warning it was going to come down. Got that on videotape. Now he says, oh, no, that's just a wacko conspiracy people. Never happened. But the video's out there. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Mike in Minnesota. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How's it? Thanks for taking my call, Michael. I was just wanting to say, just to kind of throw a little conspiracy theory out there. I mean, the powers that be know that we're going broke because they helped us do it. I mean, so if you look at the land grab that Israel wants to do, that God promised them or whatever, maybe they want us to grab whatever land they can for them so they don't have to do it before we're so broke we can't do it.
Well, Israel's already glomming on to Canada as the United States edges closer and closer to collapse. I mean, the fleas are already deserting us and finding a new dog.
Canada?
Yeah.
Oh my God! They ain't got no money.
Well, they've got more than we do, and what they've got is, they've got a credible army. I mean, we've been seeing in Canada all this time how all of a sudden it's being taken over by, all of these Israeli interests. They've got Holocaust denial laws up there. They're basically doing to Canada what they did to the United States. We've been trying to warn the Canadians against it, but they weren't paying attention.
How? I hope they're smarter than we were. That's all I can say in that. Because that's the way it just seems to me, is that we've been doing all this, our bloodshed on our dime at interest, all four of them, to get, I mean, what we did to Iraq, now you got Syria. I don't know how they're going to play Turkey out in Saudi Arabia. Maybe they'll do that themselves. But this ain't good.
No, it isn't good at all. It is not good at all.
I just hope we're still a country by Christmas. I mean,
well, we'll still be a country by Christmas. We may not be this country by Christmas, because what I still see as happening is we're going to see the federal government and the Federal Reserve collapse, like the old Soviet Union did. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia didn't go away. Russia is still there. They're a booming economy over there right now. And we need to learn from what they did right, learn from what they did wrong. We've got to be working on our blueprint for the new America right now, every single day, about how we're going to restart this nation back on the founding principles that it was started with back in 1779.
Minus all the trickery and deception and
you got
foreign scheming and influence.
And no private central banks. No private central banks. No private central banks, period. End of discussion. First carpetbagger comes in and says, we got to restart the private central bank scam again. Got a tarred, feathered, hanged, drawn, quartered, burned, and the ashes peed on by a rabid dog.
Honest to goodness. Well,
okay.
Let's wish our nation luck on this one. We're going to need it.
Yeah, I think this could be the beginning of the end for the United States of America, because nobody's buying this stuff, and the Obama White House is still pushing forward, saying we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. If it were just Syria, they would have backed off already. But because Syria is essential to keeping the war wagon on track into Iran, that's why they're pushing this thing. And after I wrap up with a few more 9/11 stories, I'm going to get back onto this thing. Thanks a lot, Mike. We're going to let you go here. Now, inevitably, over the next 24 hours, I mean, we're already seeing on the corporate media all these specials about 9/11 and Flight 23 trying to reinforce the official story, and their viewership numbers are down in the Al-Qaeda. And we're already seeing the flood of the pod people coming back. These are the government propagandists who are trying to poison the discussion on 9/11 by inserting a bunch of absolute total nonsense and junk, like there were some strange pods on the planes that hit the World Trade Towers. And, of course, their old standby, there was no plane at the Pentagon, it was a missile, and you're all a government disinformationalist if you're not going to admit that. And it's called poisoning the well. It's a very old propaganda technique, which is when people are having a serious discussion about something that the government does not want discussed publicly, they'll plant some complete piece of easily discredited nonsense in there, so the corporate media can ridicule the whole thing. And by the way, ever since that whole no plane thing came along, anytime the corporate media feels that they have to attack the 9/11 truth movement, the first thing they go to is, oh, these bozos don't think there was an airplane at the Pentagon. No, we don't think that. That's the government propagandist trying to sell that. And if they could ever convince the 9/11 truth movement to sign on to it, and they claim really close early on, then, of course, they would release one of those confiscated videos that very clearly shows it was a 757 plowing into the Pentagon and say, oh, those kooks, those nuts, see how wrong they were about the no plane at the Pentagon. Obviously, they must be wrong about everything else. But thankfully, there were a lot of 9/11 truthers who didn't fall for it, and as a result, that whole poison the well situation fizzled. A little reminder that when 9/11 happened, the FBI had just arrested the largest foreign spy ring in U.S. history, working for Israel. Carl Cameron on Fox News did a 4-part special show on the Israeli spy ring, and included in that report was, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information that came from a U.S. government official to Carl Cameron. In other words, there was evidence that linked those dancing Israelis to 9/11, and it was classified by the U.S. government. That just screams cover-up right there. We're going to go to the phones here. Mike in Oregon. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I always listen to you. Been listening for a couple of years. all over the site, all over RBN, everybody. My question is this. I have a worry. Now, I've been listening to your theory of Federal Reserve going down, coming collapse, mass chaos for about 6 months until we get everything in order and coming back. Now, I have a problem. I'm wondering how am I going to be able to protect myself? Now, I am a felon. My felony had nothing to do with drugs or guns or violence or anything like that. But, of course, I can't have a gun. Now, if I can't have a gun, how bad, in other words, are they going to really spend, because I can't see myself without protection. If I'm sitting at home and crowds of hordes trying to get into my house, trying to get my emergency supplies, what am I going to do?
Well, are you prevented from owning a crossbow? Because those can
no,
be
I don't think so.
Those can be even more psychologically effective deterrent than a gunshot. People's used to the images of gunshot, but arrows sticking out of somebody's head, that's actually going to be emotionally more devastating. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show here, and the battle is on for the future of the United States of America. Indeed, for the future of the entire world. The war hawks want their war. We're seeing a very alarming story as congressional support continues to crumble, and now with Assad agreeing to this Russian deal to turn his chemical weapons over to international controls, the justification for this war just went out the window. And the White House is already saying, well, we're skeptical, it's a stalling tactic. You know, they want their war anyway. And apparently we're getting this story that just came out of the Hill, where the White House is now back to insisting that Obama has the legal authority to launch a strike on Syria without the approval of the United States Congress. And here's the interesting quote. White House counsel Catherine Rumler told the New York Times that a strike would be lawful under both domestic and international law. She told the paper the president could strike because of the important national interests surrounding the use of chemical weapons, even without Congress or United Nations approval. Rumler contended that while the Syria situation may not fit under a traditionally recognized legal basis under international law, it would nevertheless be justified and legitimate. In other words, she's basically saying we're going to say it's legal even though we acknowledge it isn't. And it isn't. Under the War Powers Act, which was specifically passed by Congress to limit the ability of the president to just fling U.S. armies all over the globe, absent congressional approval, the president can only respond to a direct attack on the United States of America, which guarantees that there's going to be a false flag attack launched against those U.S. warships in the Med. That's their last desperate grasp to get this thing going. I mean, the doublespeak is coming out of here. You know, it's legal, but it's not legal. Or it's legal because we say it is what they're saying. Now then, I want you to write down this phone number. Area code 202-224-3121. That's area code 202-224-3121. That is the phone number of the switchboard in the Capitol Building, Washington, D.C. You call that number and ask to speak to your 2 state senators and your district representative, and you keep calling every single day and say, this is no. More than no, it is heck no. It is darn no. It is what part of no do you not get? We have to keep up the pressure because AIPAC is mounting their full court press to convince Congress to vote for war with Syria. They're trying to hijack Congress away from the American people whom Congress is supposed to represent. They're trying to steal Congress to serve Israel's and the bankers' interests. And we may not be able to stop them. But what we can do is deny this government the illusion of legitimacy or public mandate or public support for this. It is the duty of every single American to stand up to the world and say, we oppose this, we do not support it, we do not bear responsibility for it. We have to do that, get that message out there. We will not accept the blame for these wars because they were started without our permission, and we know they were started with lies. And at some point, the American people, now knowing they're lied to by this government on a regular basis, they're going to get angry. There's got to be a flashpoint. Nobody wants to live with a government that lies to them on a constant basis. You can't know what's really going on in the world. You can't know if your children are being blown to bloody bits for a legitimate purpose. You can't know what the real state of the economy is when you know the government is lying to you on a regular basis. Yeah, the U.S. is already out there trying to back away from this deal, this bear trap that Kerry walked into. Russia says Syria should surrender their weapons, and Kerry says, oh yeah, we're into that as well. If he wants to avoid attack, surrender the weapons. Syria says, okay, you can take them. It's not like I'm using them. And now the U.S. is trying to get out of that and go back to saying, yes, we have a legitimate reason for war. And they don't. The White House admits they don't actually have any evidence at all that Assad had anything to do with this. And they're still moving forward saying, he's guilty because we say that he is. This war is legal because we say it is. Isn't that the very definition of a dictatorship? Of a tyrant who stands up there and says, this is legal because I say it is. Let's see. Israel lobbying for a U.S. attack. We already saw that one here. It's a very, very dark time. And again, let me give you that phone number again. Actually, I lost the page already. But you can go to congress.org and you can get the contact information for your members of Congress, including fax numbers, postal addresses, whatever. You have to keep up the pressure every single day from now until either Congress votes this down or votes it up, or the White House goes ahead and attacks. And the very future of our nation is at stake, because there's more than Syria on the line here. The agenda behind all these wars is to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, where the U.S. dollar is the trade and reserve currency around the world, which means everybody doing business has to come to the United States and borrow dollars at interest to conduct business. So the U.S., well, the Wall Street gets a piece of the action of global commerce without having to do anything for it other than come up with ink and paper or tapping on a computer. It's like the mafia. We get a piece of the action of whatever you're doing. You're selling grain to Venezuela and they're doing oil back. We have to have a piece of the action. You got to go through the dollar. That's what this is all about. Now then, let's see. Documents have surfaced confirming that the NSA does have backdoors into all of the web software. So-called HTTPS is backdoored. Smartphones are backdoored. Now, we've been talking about how U.S. government agencies were spying on businessmen and business interests up at the Seattle APEC. NSA was denying that they were doing any economic espionage at all, that it was all related to national security, and apparently the latest release of NSA docs shows that the U.S. was spying on the Brazilian oil company Petrobras. So, yes, they're doing economic, industrial, corporate espionage. Apparently, Glenn Greenwald is now being given police protection by the Brazilian government because of threats against him down there. Webmaster Tom Freely was out there saying that he is now being subject to harassment, and his wife was being threatened by strangers in business suits with guns. And I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, because a lot of what Claire and I have been through over the years, especially when we're in Southern California, this stuff does happen. We're into absolute brown shirt Gestapo tactics on the part of the United States government, trying to silence the truth, trying to keep it away from the public. And that's why today, tomorrow, Wednesday especially, those of you who are clued in, you need to print out some of this stuff, like Bush, Secret Service leaving him there, reading about the pet goats, the photos of the obvious demolition cutter charges scars on the load-bearing members of the World Trade Towers, the BBC saying that World Trade Center 7 collapsed 26 minutes before it happened. Print it out, hard copy, take it around with you, and as you meet people in the supermarket, at your work, at your school, whatever, just share it with them and say, if you're not paying attention to the independent media, now you should, because here's what's going on. Because right now, because of this very clumsy lie that Assad gassed women and children right in front of the UN inspectors, Americans finally understand they live in an age of lies. We're the most lied to people on the face of planet Earth, only now we know it. And Americans are angry, and it opens up this wonderful opportunity for the truth movement to get out there and point their attention at USS Liberty, Iran-Contra, USS Maine, USS Maddox, 9/11 itself. Because Americans now understand, yeah, this government lies to them. Not occasionally, not in times of emergency. It's constant, ongoing. I remember as a kid being brainwashed about the evils of the Soviet Union and how they constantly propagandized and lied to their people. Guess what? What we're seeing here before us today is worse than anything I ever read about happening in the Soviet Union in terms of misleading and deceiving their population. It's up to you. I need you to call Congress. I need you to fax them, email them, post a letter, everything. Keep up the pressure. We've got to prove to AIPAC and the corporate media they are no longer in control of Americans. Until tomorrow, aloha, America.